I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Oracle's cloud growth continues to soar, sending first quarter revenue through the roof. We will break down the numbers from the stronger than expected earnings scorecard. Plus, the missed opportunity at Equifax, a big one. The credit monitoring giant was fully aware of the software flaw exploited by hackers months before they struck. We will discuss the continuing fallout and lawmakers demanding answers. And Apple could be on the verge of its biggest deal ever. We'll break down its possible investment in Toshiba's chip unit. But first, to our lead. Oracle reported first quarter earnings showing a surge in cloud growth. Total cloud revenue for the quarter was $1.5 billion. That's an increase of 51% year over year. Shares in extended trading up just under 2%. The company, well, now 0.5% about. The company issuing guidance of $9.5 billion for the second quarter. Oracle is in the midst of shifting its services and products to the cloud from legacy on-premise technology like servers. And earlier this month, regulatory filings showed that top executives would only receive their performance options if the cloud business showed significant growth. Joining us now to discuss our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, and from New York, Techonomy CEO and our Bloomberg TV contributor, David Kirkpatrick, my guest host for the hour. But Corey, I want to start with you. What's your take on the numbers here when it comes to cloud growth?
Let me get this straight. So the executives at Oracle decided to change their bonus plan to get paid better if cloud growth is going to grow faster.
It sounds
grew faster.
Good.
It's a good idea if it's going to grow faster. And Oracle is great at many things, not least of which paying their executives lots and lots of money, more than anyone else in the business.
Exactly.
These results show very, very, very strong movement away from on-premise software to the cloud. They have done that thing that's so impossible to do. They've changed the fan belt whilst the engine has run, and they're doing it very well. And these actually on accelerating on a quarter-over-quarter basis, an accelerating pace of growth on cloud as a percentage of revenues, and the growth in that cloud business. It's very impressive. I mean, it's 13 weeks. $1.5 billion in cloud revenues. It's up about 80% of the previous year.
So do they deserve their bonus there?
Oh, I think they deserve more. They're such nice people over there.
David, what's your take? Obviously, Oracle has been...
You're right, David, you're not used to me being this kind, are you? It happens.
Oracle has been behind, let's be honest, for a long time when it comes to other more forward-thinking cloud service providers. Is this proof that they can turn themselves around or turn in a different direction when the will is there?
Well, it must have been galling to Oracle executives in the last few years when Amazon and Google and companies that really weren't competitors of theirs, obviously Salesforce, have been getting so much attention for their cloud successes, and Oracle is sort of seen as an old stodgy, packaged software maker. So it is super impressive, as Corey said, that they're able to be making these changes, although, they have been laying the groundwork for this for a long time. Even when Mark Benioff left Oracle and started Salesforce, Larry Ellison was on the board in the early days and then was famously kicked off once he started NetSuite, which competed with Salesforce. Then recently, last year, Oracle bought NetSuite, which is a big part of what's allowing their cloud revenues to grow. I think with the Oracle brand, the platform that company that Ellison also controlled has built in the last few years is really coming into its own.
Right, and the NetSuite acquisition, Corey, was a bit controversial because Ellison is part of both companies.
Right.
What is the impact we're seeing from the NetSuite acquisition?
It's helping, and it's helping those cloud revenues grow here, I think. The results, the NetSuite, though, is not the biggest part of the story here, and it's in there. We'll see if they tell us anything at the conference call about what the NetSuite portion of this was. But you also saw, interestingly, a slight pickup in gross margins. Julia Chatterley asked me about an hour ago, and I didn't have an answer yet because I hadn't updated my model. But I've since done so to some degree, and I've got more work to do. But what it shows me is that the investments that they've made in the cloud, which was really, really expensive, is starting to tail off a little bit. And you don't just see it in R&D, you actually see it in the cost of goods sold. And the cost of goods sold, the margin, the gross margin basically, is getting just a little bit better. What that suggests to me is that the investments are starting to sort of roll over. We're not seeing the cost of developing this new software quite as high, and now they're starting to benefit from all these applications that have been rewritten for the cloud, the new method to deliver them and bill for them on the cloud, and it's working. Customers like it, and it's costing them less to build it.
So does it matter that they were late to the game here? Does it matter that others have such a big head start?
I mean, there's no fourth quarter in finance. There's a fourth quarter in football. The difference is the fourth quarter in football is the end of the game. There's another fourth quarter every year. These guys have shown that slow and steady is really winning the race here, and that they have become a dominant, if not the dominant company in the cloud when it comes to software.
And yet you have other cloud providers. Obviously, David, you mentioned Salesforce, and then of course there's Amazon, Google, Microsoft trying to get a piece of the cloud in a different way. It's sort of a whole new kind of race we're seeing here.
Well, in effect, Oracle has no choice but to make this transition. And by conventional analysis, you'd say they were late. The fact that they kept their profits up, their stock is at a high, that they're somehow managing that transition is masterfully impressive. But they really don't have a choice. They wanted to keep those extraordinary margins of packaged software, with them as long as they could. And it's ironic that, they actually probably don't want to move all the way to the cloud. Another story we'll certainly touch on during the hour is Equifax, and that shows that there are huge risks to putting too much stuff in the cloud and making things internet accessible. And Oracle's clients have historically wanted to have control of that data, and that's one reason they paid so much for such high-quality Oracle software that sat on their own servers. But this company is, walking a tightrope in a beautiful way.
All right, we are going to talk about Equifax in a moment. David Kirkpatrick, my guest host for the hour. You're sticking with me. Our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. Thank you, as always, for stopping by. Now, to another story we have been following. President Trump says he's close to a deal with congressional Democrats to permanently protect nearly 1 million immigrants brought illegally to the U.S. as children from deportation, so-called dreamers. Bloomberg's Alex Wayne joins us now from Washington. All right, Alex, there's been a lot of back and forth, deal, no deal, what happened at dinner, what didn't happen at dinner, the tweets, disputes of the tweets. Where are we now?
We think that they're still pretty close to a deal on DACA, some sort of legal protection for the dreamers, as their advocates call them. But Trump has spent the day kind of contradicting himself about the conditions for a deal, whether a border wall will have to be part of it or not. He said several different things throughout the day. So at this point, it looks like they are close to a deal, and the border wall will not be part of it. But Trump apparently wants some kind of assurance that Democrats won't obstruct a wall in the future. I don't know how he's going to secure that. So
what was the point of the actions he took last week if today he's willing to make a deal?
Yeah, well, I don't think Trump really wanted to end this program. He faced pressure from his right flank to end it because he promised to do it as a candidate. And so he pulled the plug on an executive order that his lawyers had been telling him probably wouldn't withstand a court challenge anyway. But he wants, I believe him when he says this, he wants these protections for these immigrants to be enacted into law so that they can't be removed just by a court challenge. So he wants a deal on this, but he also wants his wall. So he's also stuck with his base, his political base now is very upset with him for going back on this campaign promise. Ann Coulter has spent all day on Twitter today saying things like he should be impeached or he's breaking his promises. Breitbart, now run by Steve Bannon again, has been hitting Trump hard on this all day long.
Just another day in the life of the Trump administration. All right, our Bloomberg News reporter Alex Wayne, I know you'll keep us posted on whether a deal is indeed struck. All right, coming up, Google has been hit with a class action lawsuit alleging the tech giant is biased against women when it comes to pay and promotions. We dive into the case next. This is Bloomberg. Bitcoin fell for a fifth straight day, the longest losing streak in more than a year, after one of China's largest online exchanges said it would stop handling trades by the end of the month. This is part of a wider crackdown by the Chinese government on cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin had risen more than fourfold this year amid greater acceptance of the blockchain technology that underpins the exchange method, global political uncertainty, and increased interest in Asia. Well, Google has been hit with a class action lawsuit over claims the tech giant systematically pays male employees more than women. It follows a 2015 federal labor investigation, which found systemic pay discrimination among the 21,000 employees at Google's headquarters. The initial stages of the review found women earned less than men in nearly every job classification. Joining us now to discuss, our Bloomberg Tech reporter Mark Bergen, who covers Google, and still with us, David Kirkpatrick, Techonomy CEO in New York. So, Mark, what do we know? Who are these women? What are they claiming?
Right. It's been a really rough summer for Google. This is, in addition to the Department of Labor's suit, they're bringing the three women are former engineers and employees at Google in various different positions. And they're claiming not only that the company pays men more than women, but that women are on a different, what they call job ladder, and basically a track and trajectory to have jobs like the high-paid technical engineering jobs where they are paid more.
So how is this distinct from the Department of Labor investigation, which said there was systemic analysis across 20,000 employees, that there is a difference?
So the lawsuit that was brought this morning actually cites the Department of Labor lawsuit and the evidence there where the department did a statistical regression and showed that Google has paid women less for similar roles. Google's claim and response has been, you don't have all our data and we're not giving you that for various reasons. And to a lot of these claims, Google's come back and said, the difficulty here is that men typically go into more high-paying roles. There are more men in engineering, there are more men in the technical jobs that are just paid better across the industry.
Meantime, employees on their own have given some data to the New York Times that they believe shows, from data collected from their colleagues, shows systemic pay differences.
Correct. That was, there was a couple of years ago, there was an effort led internally to collect salary data and compensation data, and that was across all different, like Google has different 1 to 10 rankings of the employees, and they showed that a level 5 employee for the man would be paid more than a level 5 employee, the female. Google's response to that has been that they don't have all the data, they don't have location, they don't have a lot of job history, they don't necessarily have the specific jobs that they're paid for. The types of job they're performing, like someone who's a search engineer might be paid a lot more than someone who's just working on operations. This,
of course, on top of long-standing issues with the number of women in tech, there are only, 20% women in the technical, which are the really critical positions at Google. On the back of the James Damore memo, where an engineer wrote a memo to the company saying that there are biological reasons that more men are in engineering than women. Where does this leave Google right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a tough spot. They're being hit kind of on both sides. I think that the Damore's memo basically said it's clearly this has been a subject from the CEO and the management that we need to fix this issue of diversity. We need to bring in more women in technical roles. And Damore's memo was saying maybe the reason that we don't have more women in technical roles is because they're just not as good at technical roles. And of course, there was a huge backlash against that. But it does leave Google, and they've said this publicly in response to the New York Times, that because they're so big, they were the first large company to reveal their hiring their female and people of color on staff, the diversity breakdown, that they're sort of become more of a target than others.
David, what is your take on this? Google is a company that has claimed for a long time to care about women. Some of the most prominent women leaders in Silicon Valley got their start at Google, and yet, you hear these things and they don't add up.
Yeah, and yet it's been a small percentage. And I mean, I was listening and thinking about this. Men presume that men should be in the higher paid jobs. I think that's just a generic statement that sadly is true. And that's a problem that we have to kind of get over. And it's great that Google is being forced to confront that reality. Ironically, too, I think the Damore memo almost becomes a data point on behalf of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, because it really illustrates the mindset that prevails in large parts of the company, even if he was maybe a slight extreme outlier for that mindset. But it's also very interesting to look at how a company in particular, there's no other company like Google, maybe Facebook, but Google is a kind of sine qua non company, and until very recently, it could basically hardly do any wrong, right? And it was like it was like riding high, stock, money, ads, whatever, self-driving cars, pharmaceuticals, you name it. They are now on the defensive in so many areas. I don't think they're as fundamentally screwed up company like Uber, but people feel total license to come down on these companies in a way they haven't before. Senators are being asked about antitrust enforcement. I mean, this is a change in the mood big time, and I think a suit like this is very healthy because this company and the entire Silicon Valley culture does have to change.
Meantime, Mark, Larry Page has, he's now running Alphabet. Sundar Pichai is running Google in particular. I've been told that Sundar is very aware of these issues. He cares about these issues. Has there been a marked change in how this is being handled within the company?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he's certainly in his management team. You see a lot more women than historically Google's had in their leadership. I think he's been very conscious about that. They've been addressing this in the unconscious bias training, and that was their response to this lawsuit. Was Google says that at each stage of the hiring and then the stages along the company promotions, they have this unconscious bias. I think they're thinking really hard. This is a really tough problem to solve. The technology industry in general has not solved this, and Google's sort of a stand-in for that. I don't think that the problems are as systematic as they are at Uber, right? I don't get a sense from Googlers that there are going to be a lot of complaints with the culture, but they don't think of it as a toxic workplace, right? And a lot of women I've talked to have worked there have said that they've gone to other places and they think about Google as a much better workplace for women. And yet, still perhaps stuff to work on. Mark Bergen, who covers Google for Bloomberg Technology, thank you. David Kirkpatrick, you are sticking with me. All right, coming up, the Equifax breach was one of the worst in American history, but could the hackers have been stopped in their tracks? That is next. This is Bloomberg. Equifax shares continue to take a beating, falling close to 30% since news broke that hackers stole data on 143 million customers. The credit monitoring company revealed Thursday that the hackers exploited a vulnerability that could have been fixed 2 months before the breach. And the Federal Trade Commission has also announced it will be investigating the hack. Equifax also wound up in the crosshairs of Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier Thursday.
Equifax stunningly and epically failed to perform one of its two essential duties as a company: to protect the sensitive information of the people in its files. That is unacceptable, and there's no other word for it.
Joining me now to discuss Bloomberg's Mike Riley and my guest host for the Hour, Techonomy CEO David Kirkpatrick. Mike, of course, you cover cybersecurity for us. How could they not have patched this vulnerability? This is their main job.
Really?
It's to protect our information.
That's right. And in fact, these consumer credit agencies often go around telling people before this that they basically have one job, and that's security. So they clearly failed at the job. Now the story, like always, is a little bit more complicated. This particular, certainly, there was a patch out for this vulnerability, and it should have been fixed. But the other side of the story is those fixes aren't always easy. They're built into web apps, and you actually have to change not just one web app, but multiple web apps to sort of patch these things. So it's a slow process. In some really big cases of vulnerabilities, it sometimes takes months to do the complete patching job. So that's one issue. The other issue is it's one thing to be able to get into a web site through a vulnerability like this. It's another thing to be able to steal 143 million data on 143 million Americans. And the real question that hasn't been answered is, how did those two things connect? So it's not just the first failure, but it's the ability to get in through a web application and get all this data. And we don't know if that was hard to do. We don't know if it was easy to do. We don't know how long it took them, in part because Equifax isn't telling us.
And do we still not know who's behind this or have an idea?
No, the attribution on this one is a little strange. It doesn't seem like, for example, a Target where the intruders immediately tried to dump all the credit cards on forums, that they were clearly out just to make a quick buck. That doesn't seem to be the case here, which raises the possibility that these actors are a little more sophisticated. Now, that could be just more sophisticated criminals, organized crime, essentially the cyber version of that. Or it could mean that maybe there's a state hand behind this, and there was, it was criminals who got in there, but maybe there was another market for it. And really, the people in the investigation still don't know. That attribution piece often takes a very long time.
Now, David, basically anyone with a credit card was probably impacted by this, and yet the response has been completely bungled. It almost, as a consumer, it just leaves you feeling helpless.
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how urgently they did try to patch this web software when they found out about it. I'm pretty sure that we're going to find that they didn't try to do it nearly urgently enough, despite how hard it might have been. I mean, this company clearly failed in its fundamental job, which is being said widely. I think the CEO's got to go. That's the kind of thing that you just can't keep your job after this happens. When your stock drops 30%, it's clearly going to go down more. For consumers, you know, I'm not as sure what it means for consumers. The possibility this could be a state-directed attack is a very interesting one. I mean, there are states that are trying to essentially assemble dossiers on the American public for unknown reasons. That has been discussed before. This could be potentially a very effective way to add to one of those, efforts. When everybody's data was stolen, I wonder how, much risk each one of us actually faces about our data being misused. That I just haven't figured out. There's a lot of alarmist articles saying you got to freeze your credit and all that, but I just don't know. So, look, I'd love to keep talking about this, but we have to go. Mike, I'm going to have to call you to get the rest of the story. Mike Riley, Bloomberg Business Week. Thanks so much for stopping by. Techonomy CEO David Kirkpatrick, you are sticking with me. Coming up, a sneak peek at our exclusive access to the Alibaba Group during the company's 18th anniversary celebration. You'll hear from founder Jack Ma. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of First Word News. President Trump was in Florida today, where he toured damage caused by Hurricane Irma. Aboard Air Force One on his way back to Washington, he was asked about possibly replacing Fed Chair Janet Yellen.
I do respect Chairman Yellen a lot. I like her and I respect her, but I haven't made that decision yet.
Tropical storm Max has strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane off Mexico's southern Pacific coast and is forecast to make landfall today along the coast of Guerrero State, a region that includes the resort city of Acapulco. For the first time in 300 years, Barbuda is completely uninhabited. That's according to USA Today, citing Antigua and Barbuda's ambassador to the U.S. A total evacuation of the island was ordered after Hurricane Irma. Mexico's threatening to walk away from NAFTA if the U.S. initiates proceedings for withdrawal. That's according to the country's ambassador to the U.S., Geronimo Gutierrez, who spoke at an event for Politico in Washington today.
We will not remain in the table should Article 2205 be invoked, which basically allows any part of the agreement to notify the others its intent to retire.
Brazil's Attorney General's office has charged President Michel Temer with obstruction of justice and leading a criminal organization in a case that could suspend him from office for up to 6 months. President Temer has repeatedly denied wrongdoing. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 7:30 Friday morning in Sydney. My colleague Heidi Loon with a look at the markets. Heidi, good morning.
Mark, happy Friday. Looks like a mixed Friday when it comes to the Asia Open. We do have a slightly higher lead when it comes to the ASX Open. Looking at futures there, the Aussie dollar also holding on to gains despite that roundly miss when it comes to the Chinese domestic activity data yesterday. We did have a beat when it comes to those jobs numbers, an 11th straight month of gains when it comes to Aussie jobs. That is a record for 23 years now. Also taking a look at some more data out of China today. We're expecting either today or tomorrow money supply, some of these credit numbers when it comes to new loans and aggregate financing, giving us a better idea of whether that deleveraging campaign is taking hold, whether that China growth is still very much reliant on the credit-driven model. And finally, the BOJ, we're watching the Nikkei, which is pointed a little bit lower if you take a look at Chicago futures, but ahead of that Bank of Japan meeting next week, a survey of the BOJ economists expecting no change when it comes to policy. In fact, many of them expecting no change before April next year. I'm Heidi Loon in Sydney. More of Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Apple has been dominating the tech headlines this week with its product launch Tuesday. But as CEO Tim Cook took the stage in Cupertino, he was also setting in motion plans for what could become the company's largest deal ever. Apple is in talks to invest about $3 billion in Toshiba's memory chips business as part of a consortium led by Bain Capital. This according to people familiar with the matter. If the deal goes through, it could exceed the company's acquisition of Beats back in 2014. Joining us now to discuss, our Bloomberg tech reporter who covers semiconductors, Ian King, and still with us in New York, our guest host of the hour, David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy. So, Ian, why is Apple doing this? There's a lot going on here.
There is a lot going on here. The thing to understand is Toshiba is the second largest provider of something called NAND flash memory. Why do you care about that? That's one of the most important components of the iPhone. That's the medium which stores all of the data on the iPhone. Large expense there. There's only 6 makers of this technology worldwide. Samsung has 40% of the market. Apple clearly wants to keep Toshiba independent, wants to keep it as a balance to Samsung's weight in the market, and keep its cost down. That's simple as that, really.
Now, Apple has for 10 years used Samsung chips. Why?
This is the thing, if you need a memory chip, whether you like it or not, you have to at least talk to Samsung because of their massive market share. Simply put, they have the best production, they have the best technology, and they have the biggest scale. So they have an inordinate influence on pricing for those key components that Apple really cares about.
David, what's your take on this?
Well, Tim Cook's great talent has always been supply chain and logistics. And, he's hedging his bets in a critical way. Obviously, it's awkward that Apple has such dependence on Samsung for not just these chips, also screens and other components that go into their key product, the iPhone, with which they compete with Samsung's own phones. So, there's a very logical, competitive, as well as supply chain hedging strategy required here. I think also it really strikes me that Apple is getting better and better at understanding and utilizing chip technology as a competitive differentiator. And the fact that they built watches that they just launched that are the same size as the last ones, but now they connect to the wireless network. That is a massive semiconductor win because they designed the chips. So these guys are getting better at chips. They understand chips. They're big enough. $3 billion, it's a minor investment for them to have a guaranteed supply.
So, David, I'd love to hear your thoughts on President Trump blocking the deal. A Chinese-led company tried to buy Lattice Semiconductor, a U.S. company. What do you make of President Trump's decision to do that?
I think it's necessary. Unfortunately, I think, the fact is that certain technologies are key to our national defense and to our national competitiveness. And much as, I admire China, I admire Chinese industry, but the reality is that any Chinese company in some respect is a de facto arm of the Chinese government. And so anything that we sell to any Chinese company, we have to accept will be in some sense controlled by the Chinese government or highly influenced by it. I think that CFIUS, which is the U.S. government entity that decides these things, decided that was a risk we shouldn't take in this case. And I think it is right. I don't think we should be selling tech companies to Chinese companies unless they're things that are just generic.
Ian, would you agree with that?
Well, there's no doubt that what David just said is reflective of the current political environment in the U.S. and the thinking here. But really what's going on is it's about economics. China is the largest market for semiconductors, doesn't have even one of the top 10 largest producers, is trying to domesticate supply. To do that, it's trying to take shortcuts, it's trying to buy companies. A small $1.5 billion maker of field programmable gate arrays in Oregon is not going to change the balance.
Is there a security risk?
Very little. This isn't Intel.
All right. Well, two different opinions there, David. Ian, thanks so much. Our Bloomberg Tech reporter, Ian King. David Kirkpatrick, my guest host for the hour of Techonomy. David, thanks so much for stopping by. Speaking of China, Alibaba Executive Chairman Jack Ma says he doesn't believe we are heading for another bursting of a tech bubble. Alibaba shares have doubled this year, despite short sellers like Jim Chanos saying it's poised for a fall. Bloomberg's chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel, spoke exclusively with Ma in Hangzhou, China, during Alibaba's 18th anniversary celebration.
I think next 18 years, the globalization, the trade will be much better because of the internet. because this is our mission, which I said EWTP, we should be electronic world trade platform. We're making sure that a small business and young people can benefit from that. And I think 18 years is enough for us to improve globalization instead of killing globalization. I believe when trade stops, war starts.
What's your U.S. strategy right now?
We never change our U.S. strategy. We want to help U.S. small, medium-sized companies, young people to sell to China.
Sell to China.
And sell to Asia. This is what we think. We don't want to go to USA being the local e-commerce company, which I think Amazon, eBay, so many nice, interesting e-commerce companies already all over USA.
You don't want to take on Amazon doing what they're doing?
No, no.
How about in entertainment, in Hollywood? I know you had a partnership a year and a half or so ago with Amblin and Steven Spielberg. You've been patient there. You've been the tortoise there, not the hare. So what's your strategy?
So we prepared the Ali, entertainment for 10 years. We just started it. This is the number 30 year. We have 7 years to go. So the important is not going there, buy movie company or buy this and buy that. When you buy all the stuff, this is not yours. So you have to learn from them. You have a partner with them. So I think there are a lot of things China entertainment can learn from the Hollywood. We should partner with them. Should not think about it is good, let's buy it. No.
You talked about the coming winter in 2007 when you listed Alibaba.com, and sure enough, the winter came pretty quickly with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and we saw the collateral damage. We also, of course, I was watching your progress through the tech bubble and that bursting. So you've had these challenges that wiped familiar names off the board. Are we facing a similar kind of tech bubble right now with these billion-dollar unicorns and an inflated tech scene? Are there any similarities?
No.
None?
No, not that much. I think the challenge at that time, a lot of people did not understand how powerful internet is, how to do internet the way, and whether internet can sustain. So people just jump in, start to do it. And I find a lot of people have crazy ideas, but does not know how to operate, and does not know how to make their dream happen. But today, everybody knows internet is going to be powerful, it's going to change the human history. And also, I think the infrastructure of the internet, the infrastructure of the technology is much better than 10, 15 years ago. So if you're not that greedy, if you're not that stupid and crazy, it's easy to survive today and yesterday.
Alibaba founder there, Jack Ma. A reminder, you can see more of that unprecedented and exclusive access to the Alibaba Group during our special half-hour program, Alibaba, the Global Disruptor, Friday during Bloomberg Technology, 5:30 p.m. New York time, 2:30 p.m. in San Francisco, 6:30 p.m. in Hong Kong. All right, well, Microsoft is teaming up with Intel to enhance its cloud-based security in an effort to keep out hackers and the government. The new encryption protocols called Azure will essentially create a virtual black box that keeps anyone but the customer from accessing that data. This means that even Microsoft won't be able to get at your information and turn it over in response to government warrants and subpoenas. Microsoft is currently pursuing a lawsuit against the U.S. government, fighting the requirement to turn over client data, sometimes without the customer's knowledge. All right, coming up, the man who invented Twitch has a new tech startup that he thinks could revolutionize the legal industry. Could your next lawyer be a robot? This is Bloomberg. A story we are watching, Goldman Sachs sees Samsung as a top buy among Apple suppliers. Interesting compared to the story we were talking about earlier. The firm's latest research note says Samsung, along with Broadcom, Nidec, and Murata Manufacturing, are well positioned with the iPhone maker are exposed to other growth areas. Makers of advanced devices like OLEDs are likely to see the sharpest increase in margins as demand for their product increases with Apple's shift to a higher-end iPhone model. Well, former Y Combinator partner and serial entrepreneur Justin Kan is best known for co-founding video streaming services like Twitch and Justin TV. Now he is setting his sights on the legal industry. He just launched his newest venture, Atrium LTS, which is aimed at bringing the legal profession into the tech era, and secured $10.5 million in funding. Justin Kan joins me now live here in the studio. So what exactly is Atrium and how will it work?
So Atrium is a technology-enabled law firm for startups, and the company I founded, powered by this software that's created by my technology company, Legal Technology Services, or LTS.
So are lawyers being replaced by software
robots.
and robots?
Androids,
yes.
AI. No, we think that really what we're building, it's going to be a long time, probably decades before lawyers are replaced by AI, and what we're building is a suite of tools that help create like bionic lawyers, or like the RoboCop of lawyers.
So if you're a startup, are you talking to a human, or are you talking
to your
humans. Computer? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I wanted as a founder. I always wanted to talk to a human when the stakes really mattered. When we were doing big financing or M&A, I didn't want the robot lawyer or the Uber of lawyers or a marketplace of lawyers. I just wanted someone who had experience and expertise to help me. But there were things that I wanted within that. I wanted it to be transparent what the steps were to actually get the thing I wanted done. I wanted it to be price predictable. I wanted upfront pricing so I knew what I was going to pay. And that's kind of what Atrium has set out to do.
Can software actually do the job that lawyers do? I mean, it's so subjective. You read the fine print. Every situation is different. Every contract, every company, every form is drawn up differently, and it so matters what the fine print says.
So I think there's parts of what legal services do that are art, and parts that are more turning the crank, the same thing over and over and again. And that's what software is really good at. It's doing the same things over and over again. And so that's really the part that we focus on. And you're always going to need lawyers who are going to do the explaining to you, because people really want that, and also the customization of whatever forms or documents or kind of the sticky situations that you get into.
Now, you recently left Y Combinator. Why did you leave?
I want to get back closer to starting startups. I am a glutton for punishment, I guess. I felt like at YC I spent a lot of time recovering from founding companies, and I taught a lot of people about startups, and it was kind of time to shorten the feedback cycle and really be doing something where every day I felt like I was making like a substantive change to a business.
How would you describe the funding environment right now? Are we seeing a pullback, more caution, tightening of the belt?
I think there is a little bit of a tightening. I definitely think if you compare where we're at today from like 2014, 2015, it's like there's way less frothy than it used to be. But I definitely think there's also plenty of companies getting funded right now, especially since we're in September and all the VCs are back from vacation. And so, yeah, I would say it's worse than the all-time high, but not terrible.
Right. So when you say way less frothy, what do you mean?
Well, I don't.
Especially when it comes to valuations, are valuations going down? Are they?
I think valuations for
plateauing?
the Series B and C stage companies have come down, and we're requiring more like business model validation. I think there's a huge number of companies, the Uber of X of everything. I'm guilty of starting one that basically have all been exposed as having like weaker business fundamentals than I think people assumed they could get to. I think 3 years ago there was a race to like capture as much market share as possible, and now people are being much more conservative about like making sure that they want to invest in real businesses.
Now, I do want to ask you about Snapchat, because you've been a Snapchat power user. You took pitches on Snapchat, and we're seeing growth sort of slow down. Facebook copying a lot of what Snapchat does. What's your prognosis on Snap?
I think as a broadcast platform, they are hurting a lot compared to Instagram. I think Instagram, by cloning the stories feature, really took a lot of the wind out of their sails, and I see more and more influencers just anecdotally moving over to Instagram as a broadcast platform. I think as a chatting platform, Snapchat remains pretty dominant among young users.
Will that continue? Or
I think so. There's like a very strong network effect, right? Because you can't really just migrate to Instagram or other platforms if all your friends are talking there. Influencers are going to find ways to post content to both, because they'll basically go to wherever users are and whoever's courting them. I think Instagram's done a much better job understanding that were really caring about influencers, and Snapchat is kind of trying to play catch up now. They just released a feature where now you can get verified as a Snapchatter.
Right.
Previously, they had never even considered. I remember asking about getting verified, and they were like, "There's no way to do it."
Right.
So I think Instagram's been a lot friendlier to influencers. We'll see if that strategy works out really well, but I think they definitely want a lot of the market share in the influencer market.
All right. We'll be watching. You'll keep us updated. Justin Kan, CEO of Atrium, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks.
All right, coming up, it's been a busy week in the electric car world. Just when will we ditch the gas pump entirely? That is next. This is Bloomberg. This week is Electric Future Week at Bloomberg, a deep dive into electric-powered transportation. There's been a lot of news in the electric car industry this week, especially from German car makers. BMW has plans to roll out at least 12 electric vehicles by 2025. As a result, it is looking to cut nearly $2.5 billion in component spending to help finance its shift to electric cars. Also, Daimler Trucks is trying to gain a foothold in the nascent electric truck market. Daimler is supplying a fleet of electric light-duty trucks called the Fuso e-Canter to several New York City nonprofits to help make the city's clogged streets cleaner and quieter. Joining me to discuss the electric car industry, Scott Corwin. He is a managing director of Deloitte's Future Mobility Unit. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. So let's talk first about the cost. Margins, on cars are typically about like 5%. Will electric cars improve that?
Good afternoon, Emily. Thanks for having me. The question about will electrification improve the margins on vehicles? We're sort of at an extraordinary time in the future of mobility. It's coming faster than people imagine. Electrification is just one of several trends that is really driving the emergence of the future of mobility. Equally important are things like shared mobility, autonomy, and so electrification is coming. And at the end of this transformation, we're looking at the opportunity where we can move faster, cheaper, safer, cleaner, in ways that are more convenient and tailored to us. And the net of it is that probably the overall costs will come down. So today, just to give you one example, in the US, we move 3.5 trillion miles for roughly $2 trillion of income generated by the extended automotive industry. And in the future, that number is probably going to come down.
So I spoke to Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, a few months ago about his view on cars. He said he sees three big shifts: ride-hailing, self-driving, and electric vehicles. Take a listen to what he had to say.
There is a major disruption looming there, not only for self-driving cars, but also the electrification piece. If you've driven an all-electric car, it's actually a marvelous experience. And it's a marvelous experience not to stop at the filling station or gas station or whatever you want to call it.
Could electric cars, Scott, be the first of those big sea changes to hit the industry?
Well, I think what Tim has commented on, he's absolutely right. The three elements actually come together. We're already moving along very quickly in shared mobility with the rise of ride-hailing services. Electrification is probably next, and then autonomy. And I think when you look at the convergence of all three, the way that this is going to play out is that in urban areas, we will probably have fleets of shared AVs that are electric. And one of the interesting things that people don't really talk about is that for autonomy to really work, having complete electrification of the vehicle and complete drive-by-wire and connectivity is far better than a gas internal combustion engine with mechanical component parts. So in effect, what happens is electrification enables autonomy, and autonomy accelerates the adoption of electrification.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Scott Corwin of Deloitte. Scott, thank you so much for stopping by. Obviously, we'll be watching for the sea change. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. And a reminder, you can see Bloomberg's unprecedented exclusive access to the Alibaba Group during our special half-hour program, Alibaba, the Global Disruptor, Friday during Bloomberg Tech, 5:30 p.m. in New York. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.